Hello, friends. Welcome back to the library. It's Miss McDonald. I was thinking today about showing you something that I used to think was fun when I was a kid, and I used to love to do Cat's Cradle. Um, but Cat's Cradle is even older game than I am. As a matter of fact, a long time ago, when Europeans first started coming to the Americas, they came across the Bering Strait and they would see Native Americans in Alaska. And some of those tribes used strings as traditional storytelling. We talked before about how sometimes stories are passed down by word of mouth, that people will tell stories over and over. Grandparents will tell children, children will tell their children, and on and on. And to help remember the stories, they would use strings. They didn't always have a written language or didn't always have people who could read the written language, so they would make their stories in strings to help them to remember. You'll see behind me, Raven. That's a trickster tale from the Pacific Northwest. Remember, we did a trickster tale from India. This one is the Pacific Northwest. It's Native Americans. And so that's where the inspiration is for the lesson we're going to do today. So first I would like to tell you a story with this, a string. Once there was an old woman. She was a weaver. She would sit at her loom and she would weave in and out, in and out. One day she heard a buzzing. She looked around and stopped her weaving, but she did not see anything. So she went back to weaving. She wove in and out, in and out. And then she heard the buzzing louder. She looked around. She waved over her head, and she saw it. A mosquito. There it was, buzzing and flying around her head, in her ears. She said, I cannot take this and still do my work. So she got up from her loom. She reached up in the air and she got it. Did you like that story? Just an interesting story to do with a string. When I was a child, I did a lot of stories with Cat's Cradle strings. Maybe this is something you all would like to try sometime. The cup and saucer. That's true. There are a lot of really interesting things you can do. So I wanted to share some of these stories. Here's one called Lost, a Story in String, by Paul Fleischman, illustrated by C.B. Morden.
I'm curious about string telling stories.
Gareth is with us today, and he's curious about string stories. So let's see if we can shed some light on that. This one is called Lost, a Story in String. Do you see the string? There's our title page, Lost, a Story in String by Paul Fleischman, illustrated by C.B. Morden. Do you see that picture?
Yes.
Grandmother, yes, child. The electricity has gone out. Look at that. So it has. I do love a good lightning storm. Didn't we have one last time I visited? But Grandmother, the video recorder just stopped, and the TV too. Finicky beasts. The radio won't work. Reckon not. Or the computer. True, child. Grandmother, I'll die. You have to do something. You'll die? Yes. Gracious sakes. I could tell you a story about a girl whose life was truly in danger. A girl 9 years old, just like you. But if you just tell it, there won't be any pictures. You'll have 'em, though, the sort that don't need electricity. A loop of yarn is all I need. Get comfortable, child. Listen and watch. Remember my loop of yarn? There's the little girl. Once there was a girl who lived up in the mountains in a clearing you could fit in your apron pocket. Her parents tried to farm it, but times were lean. The girl didn't own one store-bought toy. About all she had in the world to play with was an old piece of string. But that was plenty enough for her. She didn't twist and turn that string on her fingers until it looked like a horse or a pig or a flip-footed goose. Sometimes she'd open the barnyard gate and bring one of her string critters inside. She'd take it to the trough for a drink of water and introduce it to all the other animals, same as if it was real. And right down here you can see this is the string making of the barnyard gate. There's the gate, crossed like the barnyard gate. Suddenly, she only had brothers. They were all near grown up and not much for playmates, so when a setter dog wandered out of the woods, one half cockleburs and the other half mud, and took a bit of jerky from her hand, she felt like she'd made her first friend. Her father let the dog stay, but that dog was a roamer. That means it ran around a lot. The first time he left, the girl got her string and worked it into the shape of that setter, with the same long nose and hang-down ears. She was standing outside. She walked him toward the house, up the steps, then through the front door, and what do you think, child? The dog came home, sleeping out on the porch in the morning. Do you see the dog's head? There's his ears on either side, and his head right there.
Yes.
Maybe I should keep using the voice for the grandmother's voice, do you think? Okay. I will tell it from the grandmother's voice. Here she is. A few weeks later, he took off again. She made the string dog, trotted him in the house, and 2 days later he was back. It was November when he wandered off next, but this time the string trick didn't work. That's how she knew he must be in trouble. A man had been hunting in their woods with a bow. She wondered if the dog had been shot or had stepped into a trap and needed help. She waited 5 days, then couldn't stand it any longer. She studied the snow. It was good for walking, just covering the ground. The dog's prints stood out in it clear as writing. She gathered some food, took all her tall walking staff, and set off before anyone else was up, to give herself time to get back before night, and to keep anyone from stopping her. See the dog tracks?
Yes.
They stand out in the snow. And what is this? That's the bow. Do you see? There's the bow. A bow is like a bow and arrow.
I have that, but it broke.
Mm,
I was just pulling it, but the arrow went too. It's just a little toy.
right.
It didn't want anybody to get hurt.
Well, this is a real bow, so this is really for hunting. Let's see what happens next. It was sunny and brisk. She made good time, following those dog tracks for miles. She wove through the woods and over ridges she'd never seen, knowing her footprints would lead her back home. She whistled for the dog, hour after hour, using the special whistle she'd taught him. Then the wind picked up. Clouds blew in and snow began to fall, thick and wet. She walked on, wondering what to do. Finally, she gave one last whistle, then turned around. But it was too late. Can you guess what happened? What might have happened to her tracks if it started snowing?
They got covered.
They might have gotten covered.
I know that because Paw Patrol, they couldn't find kitten tracks
Yeah,
because it was so snowy. It was
Right.
in a big blizzard.
but it was too late. Before she'd backtracked a mile, that snow had filled in her prints and the dog's, and she was lost. This figure is called the whistling mouth. So it looks like this is the whistler, and the whistle is going out this way. Wonder if I could make that with my string.
Maybe you should try.
Dark was coming on. In her head, she could hear her brothers saying she'd never survive. She told them right back that they'd best think again. Having so much practice changing string into different things, it came natural to her to turn that walking staff of hers into a lever, hoisting up and moving a rotten log that was twice her size and uncovering a nice patch of dry ground. She laid branches against the log to make a lean-to. She was hungry, and her satchel of food was empty. She reached into her wool dress's 2 pockets. There was part of a biscuit in one, in the other there was half a piece of jerky. She set aside part, hungry though she was, ate the rest, and made an early night of it. What did she use for a pillow, Grandmother? Pine needles, child, scratchy, but powerfully fine-smelling. This string is called, this string story, or string mate, is called Girl in a 2-Pocket Dress. It looks like these are the 2 long pockets on either side of the dress. It snowed all night and kept falling the next day. When she'd finished off the last of her food, she chewed tree sap to try to hush her stomach. Then she spied a jaybird, knew it had to eat too, and trailed it a little way through the snow. That's how she found where the hazelnuts grew. She knocked them down by the score with her staff. She filled her pockets to the tops, used 2 flat stones for a nutcracker, and dined in style that evening. This figure is the jay. Let's see if we can see the jaybird in that. It looks like that's a pointy jay beak, and there's its eye. Do you see the pointy beak?
Yes!
You have to have a little bit of imagination.
Woohoo!
That night an owl woke her up with its hooting. She could make out stars. That meant the storm was past. She'd set off in the morning, but in which direction? She felt in her bones that home lay to the north. The girl knew her constellations. There in the dark, she took her staff and turned it into a compass needle, setting it down on the snow so it pointed at the North Star. When she woke in the morning, the stars were gone, but she sighted down her staff and knew that north was straight toward a sawtooth peak. She collected more hazelnuts and set off. Unfortunately, the snow was thigh-deep. Fortunately, she was a clever tyke. With her staff, she pried 2 thick slabs of bark off a pine tree and turned them into snowshoes. What's that figure? That's the North Star, sometimes called Polaris. Do you know how we can find our way with the North Star? If we walk toward the North Star, where she pointed her staff, you will always be going to the polar north.
Where's north? I get always really confused with my
It's a
directions.
good question. When we look at a map and we see a compass rose, north is always up. But is north up there in the sky? No, north is across the land toward the North Pole, isn't it? The top of the globe. Right over here we see our globe at the top of the globe. All right, Gareth, make sure you're making good social distancing by staying on your pillow. Thank you. Good job. She walked most of 2 days. When she ran out of nuts, she spied thistletops, sharpened her staff on a boulder, and dug up the roots, sweet and juicy. She kept on toward that sawtoothed mountain. Then she heard a howl. It came from a ridgetop. She whistled, and the howl came again. She climbed up a hillside. There at the top, sprawled out, was that setter dog. He had feathers in his whiskers and a bullet in his leg. Caught stealing chickens, she figured. But she was too happy to give him a scolding, especially when from the height of that ridge she glimpsed her house, tiny in the distance. It was dusk when she arrived, towing her dog on a sled made out of pine branches. The others were amazed to see her still alive. But young as she was, she had a heap of knowledge about getting the most out of what you've got, like making a story out of a piece of string. Here is the figure called house. It looks to me almost like the fingers are trees and the house is nestled between 2 hills. Grandmother, was that story true? It might be at that. How do you know? Because that girl with the dog was me. Grandmother, you could have died. But I didn't, child, and neither will you just because the power went out. After all, you're that clever girl's granddaughter. But, Grandmother, what will I... You'll think of something, child. As for me, I think I'll get a pinch of sleep right here in this chair.
So there's the dog. So that's the
There's a dog. I think that's a different dog, but it is a dog for sure. Now this tells all about how this is an ancient pastime of using strings to tell stories. And remember, this starts with once there was a girl who lived in a city in an apartment house 40 floors high. So she made her own apartment house to help her remember the story. Now, if you couldn't read the stories because the lights were out, do you think the string pictures could help you remember what happens in the story? What's the first string picture? The barnyard gate. Do you remember what she would do with the barnyard gate?
open.
Yeah, she would make her string animals and take them in there, right? There's the dog's head. So what do we find happened next? A dog came. Yeah, well, a dog came to her house.
Then he got lost.
Then he got lost. Here's the bow to help us remember what might have happened. So you see how these string stories can help you remember how to tell a story. What do you think the story was trying to tell mostly, more than just how to tell a story and entertain yourself? It's about being resourceful. The little girl had to know how to survive. So the story tells more about how do you find north. If the sky is clear at night, you can lay down your stick and point it toward the North Star, and when you wake up, you can walk north. So things like that, being resourceful, are really helpful. I hope you enjoyed this book. If you would like to know more about Native American string stories, you can look on the internet for Alaskan string stories. There's a gentleman on there who tells wonderful stories and does incredibly difficult string figures. Gareth, could you give me that green sticky note back there? Gareth's going to help me to remember this gentleman's name. In the meantime, we have books in the library. This one is called Many Stars and More String Games. So it's a book all about these string games. These were written even before people had the internet and could go on there. But if you ask your parents, and it's okay, you can look for Alaska Native String Stories and ask your parents' permission first. Enjoy yourself. See if you can find a good string.
Maybe I should try.
And maybe you can make your own Eiffel Tower.
Or something that I know how to make.
Have a good day.
I know how to